Let's bring in former Royal Protection Officer to Princess Diana, Ken Wharfe. He joins me here at Buckingham Palace. So great to see you. The enormity of this day, the security operation, the protection of the royals. I mean, you're on the outside now, but what would it look on the inside?
Well, I think it's going to, I mean, it'll be amazing. I mean, we mentioned earlier about Winston Churchill and his state funeral in 1965, which then was the biggest ever occasion that the Metropolitan Police had actually sort of policed at that time. And here we are now, 50-odd years on, with this occasion, which completely eclipses the size of what Winston Churchill. But of course, we're in totally different times now, with social media and major changes in world affairs. This is huge. But what I've been impressed with the last few days is how things have sort of moved on a day-to-day basis. And there's no doubt about it. The Metropolitan Police, London, have hosted so many state occasions, so many ceremonial events with absolute perfection. And we've learned from all those occasions. We've had Queen Mother's funeral, Diana's funeral, etc. Now we have here this occasion, and we learn from that. And what I've seen here is just exactly and how the police have worked, not only in London, but we've brought in literally other constabularies from throughout the United Kingdom to police this, and at a great cost. But you cannot put a cost on something like this. It has to be the best. And I think that what's impressed me is the way that not only the police, but members of the public have taken part, voluntary people that have worked to assist this process. It's quite extraordinary.
Oh, the Scouts and John's Ambulance have all been part of this, and it has contributed to what is a great camaraderie almost. You mentioned Princess Diana's funeral 25 years ago. That was on William's mind as well. He was talking to well-wishers as he was receiving floral tributes, and he said as he walked behind the Queen's coffin just a couple of days ago here at Buckingham Palace, it did take his mind back to the past. We're going to see Prince George and Princess Charlotte join in that ceremony today. They're quite little kids. How do you think that's going to go?
It's difficult to give an answer to that. But I mean, look at when Harry walked behind his mother's coffin. I mean, that was a big moment for him. And I remember that time, a great deal of controversy about whether that should have been allowed for a 13-year-old boy to walk behind so publicly his mother's coffin like that. I think what we have to remember here, of course, that behind us, Buckingham Palace, the King now, Prince William, and Prince Harry, and Prince George, all these people we just mentioned. It's a sense of duty for them. It's all part of what they do. And I'm sure that William and Catherine will be looking after their two young children. But it is part of what they were born to do, really. Yeah. But when Diana died, I had responsibility for the security at Westminster Abbey. And then it was a huge event. Today, I mean, instead of there being 80 or so protected people, there's nearly 200 protected people from around the world, descending on London. Yeah. And we know most of them are going to be bussed in from Chelsea, with the exception, of course, of the President of the United States, refused to be part of this bus journey.
Well, he has to go in the Beast, and he will be doing that today. There is an exception just for him, I believe. But Ken, you saw, again, you were protection for Princess Diana. She was the people's princess. You saw that deep and abiding love for her. I can't compare, but tell us what it was like. The love you've seen this week for the Queen, does it compare to what there was for Princess Diana as well?
I think the sort of the sole comparison, if I'm honest, is the sheer numbers of people that have come out. I think with Diana, it was unexpected. That was a real shock. And what I remember seeing, certainly at Westminster Abbey that day, was the sort of real shock expressed on people's faces because, a young woman suddenly dies in a car crash in Paris. But now with the Queen, although it was expected by virtue of her age, there was this sort of, everyone's mentioned it this week about this solemnity, this sort of peaceful approach to, her death. And I think that is the difference. I mean, I recall when her brother, Lord Spencer, gave that extraordinary eulogy at her funeral, people started applauding in the streets in their hundreds of thousands. That isn't like that, although people actually, in the last week, have actually applauded, the King when he's arrived here and so forth. I think that's a sense of joy, really, and appreciation. But there is that comparison, but I don't think anything can actually sort of equal this. I mean, a Queen of, 70 years on the throne, the longest-serving ever monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. It's going to be not a difficult one for her son, King Charles, now to take forward, but it's going to be a different journey for him.
There certainly will be. As we remember her life, it is 6:30 a.m. right on the dot, and we are bringing you these live pictures from Westminster Hall. This is where the Queen is lying in state, and 6:30 a.m. is the cut-off for members of the public to pay their respects. In this procession we have been seeing through Westminster Hall, we can see still a few last members of the public paying their respects. We just saw another changing of the Grenadier Guards. And these live pictures coming to us. Ken, while we do that, let's get your final thoughts and perhaps your recollections in your time. You interacted with the Queen. As we remember her today, what stays with you?
Well, I think what everybody's said is, just her sense of humour, her compassion, and what a nice lady she was. I mean, I didn't meet her a lot, but I met her several times. For me, it was this generosity, this normality that all of them sort of crave for, not always possible to get. But I remember being up in Balmoral one particular summer, and one particular night, only the roars would go out in a thunderstorm with the midges sort of descending on them. I was sat in the back of a Range Rover, and suddenly there's sort of a knock on the back, and we look out of the window, and there's this woman in this sort of dry as a bone cape, the things you have in Oz. And we said, morning, how are you, Mary? She said, have you got something to eat? I said, we have. She said, we have this left, and she brought over these sort of steaming sausages and sandwiches.
Beautiful. I thought you were going to say marmalade sandwich for a moment.
No, we did those.
Ken, as we're talking about the Queen as well, I just want to reflect on these live pictures we're seeing from Westminster Hall. Last people paying their respects. I can't stop watching at their faces. The faces as people come through. There are tears, there are smiles, the solemnity in that room. You wouldn't dare whisper. The energy is something that's really difficult to describe. And now, as the final mourners shuffle out, it's just been an extraordinary 4 days, and there's something quite magic about London at the moment.
Well, I'm a Londoner anyway, and I agree with you. And there's always something magical about London. But I think with the people there that have been, for the last 4 or 5 days, been queuing up on a sort of 5-6 mile journey along the River Thames, and hundreds of thousands of people have done that without any complaint. And friends of mine were there in the last few days, and they have just said what you said. It was a journey of excitement, really. Never once did they think of abandoning that queue, because at the end,
not once,
they were going to see something that, was so important to the history of this country. And, whether you're a royalist or a Republican, I think you can't fail to respect and acknowledge something that historical in our time, the longest reigning monarch, suddenly there in the Houses of Parliament. Quite extraordinary.
We are not missing this moment, Ken Wharfe. It is an historic day, and we thank you so much for your time.